Hey, everybody. Hey, I am so glad that you are here. Would you look at somebody around you and say, I'm glad you're here too? Yeah, man, this is a great place to be on a great day of the week. I'm so glad we get to be together because here's what we're doing. We're celebrating that Jesus has been raised from the dead. Sometimes we forget why we do the whole church thing, but realistically, when we boil it down, we're reminding ourselves, and we're coming together and we're saying, look, this happened and it changed everything. Like literally everything has changed because of that event. That's why we're here. That's why we do this thing. And that's why I'm always excited to be with you and like-minded people maybe who believe that Jesus has been raised from the dead. And maybe you're here and you don't think you fall into that category yet. Let me tell you that you're still welcome. And I want you to listen in and I want you to feel the hope and the optimism that comes from the people of God around you who believe this and maybe even ask them at some point, hey, why do you believe that? Why do you believe that sort of thing? One of the reasons I do is because it changed everything about the trajectory of the world. It changed everything about the way we view the world. You look back through history, I was a history major, I'm a history guy, I love it. And you look at how drastically different the world became as a result of Jesus of Nazareth being in it. One of the areas that I think it changes just in our lives today is when we think about each other. When we think about each other. We've been in a series this last few weeks called 9 Lives. And it's a series all about who we are, what makes us tick, and what God might have to say about that. You might wonder, why do we care so much about that? We live in a world where it's really easy to isolate ourselves from other people and to think that they're bad, and they're bad, and they're bad. It's really easy, we're seeing more of this lately, to look at ourselves and say, I'm bad, there's nothing good about me. We're seeing so many people struggling with their mental health as a result, right? But when Jesus was asked, hey, what's the greatest commandment? His response was, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. So love God, love your neighbor, and you gotta love yourself implicitly, right? So if we're going to love other people, I think we gotta learn to understand them. Because when we don't understand other people, when we don't understand ourselves, it's a lot easier to not love those people. It's a lot easier to not love ourselves. Think about it. Throughout history, again, let's go back to history and history nerd time. When you look at when wars have been started and how they got started and what the processes people took to start those wars, a lot of what happened is they began by dehumanizing the people they were going to fight. They dehumanized the people that they were going to go into battle against to make it easier for the soldiers to fight against them. Because we know this psychologically. Something takes place when you view somebody as a human, when you view somebody as somebody with hurts, with passions, with children, with family, with love and art. When you can see somebody for that, it's a lot harder to hurt that person when you understand them a little bit. But when they're not human, when you dehumanize them, when you say that they're these bad people and this is why they're bad and that they're barely even human and then now they're not human, when you can do that, well, it's a lot easier to hurt those people. It's a lot easier to walk away from trying to love those people. So what we want to do is we want to understand each other and we want to understand ourselves so that we can love like Jesus called us to love. One of the ways we're trying to do that, we're using this tool called the Enneagram. We're using this tool. It's just a tool. It's not replacing the Bible or theology or anything like that, but it is a tool to help us look at what we think are these 9 basic personality types we see across civilization. There are infinite variations because everybody's a little bit different, but there are these 9 basic personality types we've looked at so far. We've looked at the 8s, the 9s, the 1s, and the 2s, all these 4 different types. Today, I want to continue by looking at the 3s. Yeah, very good. Some of you can count really good. Yeah, the 3s. We're going to go with the 3s. And now these 3s are often called the performers or sometimes the achievers. These are people who love to get out there and achieve things. Success means a lot about them. These are people that when they walk into a room, say they go to a party, and they come to a party at your house maybe, and they walk into the room and they look around and they size up the room and everybody in it and they determine, who do I have to be to make these people like me? And they know exactly who they've got to be. Or maybe you're talking to them, they've never had an accent in their life, right? They don't have one of these weird southern accents like me. They have just normal, non-regional dialect, and they're talking to you and all of that. And then they walk over and they start talking to somebody from the hills of North Carolina, and suddenly they're talking like this all the time, right? As long as they're talking to that person. Why? Because they're becoming who they have to be in order to make that person like them, in order to help that person connect with them. They, like the twos and the fours around them, in that triad around them, they have to cast an image to the world, because they kind of believe inherently that who they really are, they won't be loved for who they really are. So they cast an image of success and achievement to the world to help the world love them, to make sure that the world loves them. They are optimistic people with big dreams, and they inspire other people. Who doesn't like being around them? Everybody likes being around that people. They're usually optimistic. They think things are going to go well and that they can make it happen, and they have this knack for making you believe it too. Yeah, things are going to go well. We're going to make this happen. This is all about success and achievement. Often they can become the leaders of big organizations, churches or schools. They're really great as politicians because they can become who they need to be. They often feel most in their element when they're at work. They love working. Remember, going back to achievement and going back to success. They love working and performing for other people. And the more they work, the better they feel about it. Often to the detriment of their family and their loved ones. And they'll work because they think it's worth it. It's worth it. Whatever it takes, it's worth it. They will choose success over substance almost every time. Almost every time they'll choose success over substance. And so for them, working 80 hours a week and leaving a spouse and some kids at home is not that big of a deal, because they can compartmentalize that feeling a little bit. They go, that's not great, but if it leads me to success and achievement, it's okay. The ends always justify the means for them. Unhealthy threes usually find themselves being workaholics. This is because a lot of them grew up with receiving this message from the world. They got this message at some point when they were younger, and it stayed with them. That the world is divided into winners and losers, to achievers and unachievers, to people who are successful and people who are unsuccessful. And the only way that you get love in this world is by being somebody who achieves things. People only love you if they can respect who you are. That's the message they received at some point. And it stuck with them, and it started to shape every little thing that they did. And so they grew up thinking, I have to achieve. I have to be the best at this. I have to work the hardest so that everybody will love me. And what's really, really sad is when you see one of these people who believes this, and then they never really achieved a lot, and then they're 70 years old, and they're looking back on their life going, what did I do with it? I mean, these are the people, I was joking around with the band earlier. These are the people who are like 45 years old walking around in their high school Letterman jacket, right? If coach would have just put me in the fourth quarter, I'd be sitting in a hot tub with my soulmate right now, right? We'd have won state. All of that. And it can be really sad, can it? You know people like this. They don't spend too much time on feelings, though. They're really good at compartmentalizing that stuff because feelings get in the way of actually achieving stuff. They also compartmentalize friendships and circles of relationships. So they'll have their work friends over here. Then over here, they will have their high school friends. Then over here, they'll have their church friends. Then over here, they'll have their neighbors and all of that. They compartmentalize really well because they're always having to become somebody different depending on which group of people they are around. So you're one person when you're around your high school friends, but your high school friends wouldn't recognize you when you're around your workplace friends, and that person wouldn't recognize you when you're around your church friends, and so on. Because threes spend a lot of time changing to become whoever they need to be to make everybody around them like them and think they're successful. These are people who, when they're really unhealthy, will go into thousands of dollars of debt just to make everybody think everything is okay. In fact, everything is going swimmingly. They'll buy new cars, they'll have brand new clothes, the most expensive phones, big houses. They'll do it all so that you will think that everything is great for them, even when it's not. Well, in short, let's give you the broad strokes of all that. In short, here's what we're looking at with people like this. Their basic desire is to feel valuable and worthwhile. Who doesn't want to feel valuable and worthwhile? Everybody, really. But for threes, they take it a little bit further. A little bit further. That's their basic desire, to what's motivating them. They want to feel valuable and worthwhile. Because they're also driven by this fear of being worthless. They're so afraid that people are going to see them as worthless, because if you're worthless, then you don't get love. If you're worthless, nobody needs you. And deep down, every single one of us, we want to be needed and we want to be known. We want to be loved for who we are. But they're afraid that if people know exactly who they are, then they're going to be seen as worthless. So they cast an image of success. Now, we've talked about each one of these numbers so far having what we call a deadly sin. And what we mean by that is just a sin, a bad thing that can sneak up, something that hinders us, that can sneak up on us and just kind of bite us on the backside if we're not paying attention, if we're not really careful. There's this thing that can come and be a real detriment to us as we try to go forward in life. And for threes, it's deceit. Deceit. Now, when we think about deceit, a lot of times we think about it in terms of I'm being deceitful to others. I'm lying to others. I'm not telling the truth. I'm misrepresenting things. That is true for threes, especially when they're unhealthy, because they'll do anything to get ahead, anything to win at all costs, even if I've got to lie about it. Even if I've got to do some backstabbing at work or anything like that, I'll do it when they're unhealthy. But more than that, for threes, what they can really struggle with is deceit in the sense that they're deceiving themselves. Think about this. If you spend so much of your time putting on a different mask in front of different people and around different groups, at some point, you kind of forget who you are. You forget who you really are. And it's hard to find that again sometimes, isn't it? It's hard to remember, this is how I really feel about things. I've been spending so much of my life trying to convince people that I'm worthy based on who I am around them that I forgot who I really am, and I don't know if I'm worthy. It's a deadly sin. So, when they're unhealthy, threes can be restless because they're always looking for the next big thing, the next big promotion, the next big advancement at work or something like that. They're willing to do anything to win. And sometimes they just don't even know who they are. They just know who they got to be. But when threes are healthy, they accept themselves and they live authentically. They're modest. They have this self-deprecatory humor that's really emerges within them. And they're also pretty generous, charitable. I think we see a three in Scripture. In the ancient Hebrew scriptures, a guy named Jacob. Jacob. Now, you may not know much about Jacob, but here's the basic stuff you need to make sure you remember about Jacob. Jacob was the grandson of Abraham, and you may remember Abraham. Abraham was the one that God kind of started everything off with and said, hey, look, I'm going to bless you, and all you got to do is believe that. And Abraham said, great, I'll do it. And then God did bless Abraham. And God said, look, I'm going to bless you so much that your children and your children's children and their children and their children, for generation after generation, I'm going to bless you and your family. And then y'all are going to bless the world. And Abraham says, I receive that. I will take it. Whatever you want to give me, I'll take that, God. And so God blessed Abraham. And then Abraham had a son. His name was Isaac. And Isaac then had two sons, Jacob and his brother Esau. Jacob was a twin, the younger of the two twins. Now, I don't know if you've hung out with twins very often, but I have a set of cousins who are twins, and they always remind us which one is the older one and which one is the younger one. And Jacob and Esau were no different. Esau was older by just maybe a few minutes. In fact, what the Bible records happening is that when Esau and Jacob were born, Esau comes out first with Jacob who had a hand on his heel, which is kind of a pretty cool phenomenon, right, if we're talking about it. Yeah, and so Jacob is known early on like this, that he's right there on Jacob's heel. In fact, Jacob's name means he who grabs the heel, which is a Hebraic idiom for somebody who is deceitful. Well, they're born, and as you might expect, they're not exactly BFFs all the time. Anybody who's ever had multiple kids understands that. But Esau and Jacob are very different people. Very different people. They're not even identical twins. You know, you think about twins, you think they're going to look alike and think alike and have that kind of twin ESP thing going. But they don't. Instead, Esau is rugged and hairy and likes being outdoors and doing all of that stuff. And he's his father's favorite because he's the oldest and they kind of like the same things. Whereas Jacob is not hairy. Jacob's more smooth and has kind eyes and is just really comfortable being at home with mom and cooking and whatever. So if we were making a modern day comparison, maybe we'd say it like this. You got two twin boys. One of them likes to play football and work out and be sweaty and do all that, and the other one likes to stay home and play video games and eat cupcakes with mom. Okay? That's the difference. You can imagine those two personalities all the time. Maybe you've had a relationship like that with one of your siblings before. Don't look around at all at anybody, but like, maybe you have, and if you have, you know it can be difficult because you love that person, but you also kind of want to strangle them sometimes. You know, you want to like play pranks on them just because it gives you a little bit of release because you're that mad at them sometimes, just simmering under the surface. I imagine that was what it was like with Jacob and Esau. Because as they were growing up, they started drifting further apart. And, you know, Jacob knew that his father favored Esau. And Esau knew that his mother favored Jacob. So I imagine there was that sibling rivalry happening there too. One day, Esau was out hunting and doing all the stuff that he liked to do and all the stuff that Isaac, his father, said was great and should be rewarded and should be celebrated. He's doing all of that, and he gets really, really hungry. He gets really, really hungry. He comes back in, and he's like, I'm famished. I need something to eat. I don't know if you've ever been around somebody who got like hypoglycemic or just regular old hangry, but those people, when they're ready to eat, they're ready to eat. Like, you got to feed them something. And they're willing to do anything to eat in that moment. Well, he comes in, and he's like, I'm famished. I need to eat something, or I'm going to die. Well, his loving brother is sitting there making a stew and is almost finished. And he says, well, here you go. If you'll sell me your birthright, give me your part of the inheritance. Here's the way that works back then. If you had two sons, they would split the inheritance up into three parts, like into thirds. And the older son, even one that was only older by like 30 seconds, the older son would get 2/3 of the inheritance, and the younger son would get 1/3 of the inheritance. And so what Jacob's really asking for is that extra third. Hey, sell me your extra third. And Esau says, what? Now, I imagine in my mind that they're teenagers at this point, because this could only revolve around food with teenagers, like teenage boys who are starving. Like, yeah, I'll give you my inheritance for food. Give me that sandwich, right? And so Esau says, what good is it to me? What good is it to me if I die because I'm so hungry? Like, that inheritance doesn't matter to me. So Jacob says, so we have a deal? And Esau says, yeah, we've got a deal. Give me that food. And Esau was always mad about that with Jacob. Always mad about that with Jacob from then on. And I'm sure Esau probably thought, Jacob won't ever really do anything with this. This won't ever really be a big deal. But Jacob wanted it to be a big deal. Jacob thought, yeah, I really do have his birthright now. I got that extra third. More importantly, I got one over on my brother who's rugged and tough and likes doing all of that stuff. Well, as time went on, they grew further and further apart. And Isaac, their father, grew older and a little older, couldn't see very well any longer. And finally he said, look, my time's coming. I need to give my blessing to my son. Of course, Esau, my inheritor. Now, you and I, when we talk about blessings today, we kind of take them with a grain of salt, right? So somebody saying something nice to us. But for them, it was a lot more involved in that, especially if you were in Abraham's line, like we talked about earlier. Because imagine this. God was blessing Abraham, and that blessing was supposed to pass on to the next person in Abraham's line, which was Isaac. And that blessing was supposed to pass on to the next person in line, which was supposed to be Esau. And then his children, and their children, and their children. That was the idea. So God had made Abraham very wealthy, very prosperous, had enlarged his area of influence. God had done the exact same thing with Isaac. And so now Esau is going to be getting this same blessing. They really believed it was like this mantle passing on to him, and it was going to be coming to him. And now God was going to make him prosperous, going to make him fruitful, and all of that stuff. So Jacob finds out about this. His mother, Rebekah, overhears this conversation between Isaac and Esau, where Isaac says, hey, I want you to go out and I want you to kill some wild game and fix it up exactly like I like it. You know how it's done. Your mother taught you. And then bring it back here, and I'm going to eat it, and then I'm going to give you a blessing. I'm going to give you the blessing. And Isaac's all excited, so he runs out and he starts getting all this stuff together. Now, at this point, he's a grown man. He's a grown man, and he's like, yes, this needs to happen now. Rebekah hears about it, tells Jacob, because remember, Jacob is her favorite. And Jacob goes in, they devise a plan, and Jacob goes in with some goat fur, goat hair, all over his arms, covering his arms, and puts on some of Esau's clothes. Long story short, they trick Isaac into giving Jacob Esau's blessing. Nobody knows anything until Esau comes back and says, hey, I would like my blessing now. Here's the food. Isaac says, well, I just did that for you. I just blessed you. What are you talking about? And he says, I wasn't in here. I've been out hunting. And they put two and two together, and they figure out that Jacob, the deceiver, the trickster, that weasel of a little brother, has figured out a way to get Esau's blessing. And Esau says, well, can't you just bless me? Why just bless me now? And Isaac says, I can't. I gave that to Jacob. I can't undo it. It was serious. And Esau vows, I'm going to get him. When my father dies, I'm going to get him. So Rebekah knows this too. So she figures out a way to work with Isaac to get Jacob out of there. And Jacob has to go find a wife in a distant land. At this point, Esau is married. He has 2 wives, but Jacob has no wife. So he's sent off to go find a wife. And he gets a little bit of a taste of his own medicine, because he comes upon this family, comes upon this girl named Rachel, where he'd been sent. And he loves Rachel, just loves Rachel from the start. So he goes to her father, a man named Laban. And he says, hey, Laban, I'd like to marry your daughter. And Laban says, well, that'd be great, but you got to work for me for 7 years first. Now, I know what all you guys are thinking. You would definitely work 7 years for your wife, right? Me too. I'd work 14 for mine. But Laban is a bit of a taskmaster and a trickster in his own right. Actually, he was always messing around and kind of not doing right by Jacob, tricking him and deceiving him. Jacob ends up getting a lot of a taste of his own medicine. Well, after 7 years, he says, hey, look, the time is up. Let's do this. Let's get married. And so the night of the wedding, somehow Laban tricks Jacob into marrying his other daughter, Leah, who he does not want to marry. So the next morning, Jacob comes and says, hey, what happened? You told me I was marrying Rachel, and I was supposed to marry Rachel, but you put Leah in there, and what's going on? Laban says, well, we never let you marry the younger daughter before the older daughter, so that's just not our custom. We don't do that. And Jacob says, well, we had a deal. And so Laban says, well, I'll tell you what. Just give it a week. Give it a week or so. And then you can marry Rachel, and then you would just work for me another 7 years. That's the sort of things that Laban would do to him all the time. Well, after about 20 years of this, Jacob has had enough. Enough. Jacob has had enough. He's got 2 wives, he's got children. God has blessed him. Remember, he received that blessing, and his flocks have grown. He's become more prosperous. And so he decides, I'm going home. I'm going home. And this is honestly a bit of a mark of growth for him, because 3s, when they're compartmentalizing their feelings and they're staying away from people in different areas and all that stuff, it's all about achievement and using all of their energy for success and achievement. So one of the things they do is they avoid conflict. Remember, when he runs away originally, he's avoiding conflict there. Doesn't want to deal with it. Doesn't have time to deal with it. He's got bigger fish to fry, like getting a wife and becoming prosperous. Well, here he is. Now he's going home because he's ready to deal with conflict. He's ready to deal with his past. That's a little bit difficult for 3s sometimes. He's headed back. And he knows that there's going to be some conflict. So he goes ahead and he sends some of his servants. Remember, he's gotten pretty wealthy at this point. Sends some of his servants to go say hi to his brother Esau. Hey, Esau, I'm going to show up. I'm going to be there. Just wanted you to know I want to come say hi. So the servants come back after they visit Esau, and they say, Esau said, okay, that's great. Also, he's going to come meet you. And Jacob says, well, that's awesome. I can't believe it. And then the servants go, and he also said he's going to bring 400 men with him, which sounds like a fight, right? Sounds like a small army. Sounds like a small army coming to get Jacob. And Jacob probably instantly thought, I'm going to be repaid for all of this. All of the stuff I did to him, he's going to get me now. He's going to get me. So he starts preparing. He starts getting all the stuff ready. So just in case things go haywire, that he'll be set and his family will be okay. And it'll just be him that takes the brunt of it. He gets it all set and gets it all ready. And that night he lays down and he goes to sleep. And he ends up wrestling with God. He wrestles with God. He thinks it's just a regular person at first, but then suddenly he realized this isn't a regular person. This is God I'm wrestling with. Towards the end of this little wrestling match, the person that Jacob is wrestling with touches him right on the hip, wrenches his hip a little bit, and he's left with this wrenched hip. And I think it was more than just a wrenched hip he was left with. I think it was an understanding that things were changing, things were different. Because in this conversation he has with the person he's wrestling with, the person that he understands to be kind of God there with him, says, God is with you. Don't worry. God is with you. Now imagine being somebody like Jacob, where like you've walked out on your family. You've run away from family because you've done them wrong. Like you've done a lot of bad stuff in your life. You've been a type of person who wins at all costs. You've done things you shouldn't do. And then to hear somebody that you understand to be God saying to you, don't worry, God is with you. God's never left you. God's with you. Imagine what takes place in your heart there. Some of you, you've walked into that, right? Like you've been following Jesus for a little bit, but before that, you weren't. And the moment you realized the amount of forgiveness that was available to you, it changed you forever. It changed the way you interacted with other people. It changed the way you served other people. It changed the way you approached the world, because this great forgiveness that was given to you was almost overwhelming and unbearable. That's what I think Jacob experienced in that moment. Because the next day, he gets up and he puts all of this stuff together. He gets up and he puts all of this stuff together that he's going to send to his brother Esau as a gift. He's going to soften the blow, I think, a little bit. He sends the stuff to Esau as a gift. Flocks of donkeys and sheep and goats and cows, whatever, you name it. He puts it together to send over to him. And Esau, as he's approaching, sees this present coming, and he doesn't know what it is. He just kind of sees it. And then he looks up as they're all, Jacob's family standing here and Esau's family standing over here. They're looking at each other across the way. And you can see, just imagine yourself being there. Use your holy imagination with this. These brothers who haven't seen each other in 20 years, they've changed. They were young men, now they're not. And they see each other from across the way. And here is what we see happen in Genesis 33. Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. Wow. Think of all of the stuff that Jacob had taken from Esau. Think of all the reasons Esau had to be mad, especially if you were a person who thinks like Jacob thinks, that it's all about achievement, and it's all about possessions, it's all about getting what I need to get, and doing whatever it takes to get ahead. Imagine if you're Jacob in this moment, and your brother Esau runs up and embraces you, when heretofore you thought he was going to run up and punch you. He threw his arm around his neck and he kissed him, and they wept together. Golly, man. Now that's a story of forgiveness. That's something you can wrap your mind around, your heart around. Like, that's how we're supposed to treat each other. That's what we can do for each other. That's huge. But think about it like this. Like, think about Jacob and what's going through Jacob's heart and mind and soul in that moment. Think about that. This forgiveness for him would have been overwhelming. And then Esau asked this. Esau asked, what's the meaning of all these flocks and herds I saw, I met? These ones that were walking, what's the meaning of that? What's that about? Now Jacob, a true three, and now a healthier three. He's being charitable. And so he says this, to find favor in your eyes, my Lord. To find favor. I want to give this back. I want to give to you as a sign of love. But look what happens. Esau has forgiven him, and Esau wants him to know that it's not about the stuff you can give me. I've never cared about that stuff as much as I cared about you. But Esau said, I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. This is some real healing, right? Some real healing. You show up thinking it's going to be a Jerry Springer show, and it turns into a real therapist office. Some real healing going on. See, what goes on after this is Jacob insists, like, no, you've got to take it from me. You've got to take it from me. So Esau says, okay, yeah, I'll take it, fine. It's mainly because he's been forgiven, and he's so thankful that he insists that Esau takes these things from him as a gift. You know, when you understand the generosity that's been given to you, it's a lot easier to be generous to other people, I think. When you understand that everything you own comes from God, it's a lot easier to give those things back to God and to God's people. When you understand that if it wasn't for God's blessing in your life and God's provision in your life, it's a lot easier to let go of some of the things that you would otherwise try to hold on to, those possessions and those achievements. Everything you own, if you're a follower of Jesus especially, everything you own belongs to the creator of the universe. You know, so many of us, we run around thinking like a younger Jacob, don't we? We run around thinking that we have to impress people to be loved, that we have to get ahead of everybody else because then they'll respect us and then they'll love us. And we go around approaching things that way. And worse yet, we think that that's how God views things too, that God wants us to make sure that we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing, and that God wants us to make sure that we're achieving all we're supposed to achieve. And if we don't give this amount of money to the church, and if we don't show up this often to church, and if we don't do this, and if we don't do that, then God's not happy with us. So many of us, we think that God is looking at us and going, well, you've been doing X, Y, and Z, and what do you have to show for it? You don't have a high-paying job. You don't have a big house. And we think if that's the case, that God's not happy with us. But friends, that could not be further from the truth. God doesn't judge you based on accomplishments and possessions. He looks inward to what's going on in your heart. He doesn't judge you by the size of your house. He judges you by the size of your heart for others, by the size of your heart for God. Doesn't judge you by the size of your bank account. He judges you by the size of your generosity. The truth is So many of us, whether you're a type 3 person or not, we live in America. And in America, type 3 people, man, it's hard for you. Because constantly you're told, just work harder, cast that image of success out to everybody. So all of us, we need to remember this. We need to hear this. Here's the bottom line today. You are loved for more than your accomplishments and possessions. Let me say that again. You are loved for more than your accomplishments and possessions. And hopefully you've got people in your life that are going to look you in the eye and say, I love you, who mean it this way. But if you don't, come find me, I'll tell you. If you don't, talk to the God of the universe. God's not impressed by your possessions and accomplishments. God's not impressed by that. Look what God did. God made you. God made the world. God made all of these things. God made the stars and the planets and the sun and dolphins, which are incredible creatures. God made all of these things. Everything you can see and everything you can't see, God made those things. Why would God be impressed because your 401k is fully funded? It doesn't make any sense. You are loved, period, by God. Period. You are loved. So if you think you might be a 3, here's my challenge to you. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to focus more on what God thinks than what you believe other people think. Focus more on what God thinks than what you believe other people think. Now, if you think you might know a 3, or you might love somebody who's a 3, I want you to do this. I want you to remind them that they are loved for more than their accomplishments and possessions. Go out of your way to figure out a way to do that. Let them know, because they need to hear it. So as we kind of wrap up the message today, I want to ask you to do me a favor. Would you bow your head and close your eyes just for a moment, wherever you're at? We're going to pray together. Nobody's going to reach out and grab you or anything like that, but we just want to take a moment to reflect. I just want to take a moment to reflect. Maybe you're here today and you've been struggling with this. You say, I'm not a type 3 person, I don't think, but I'm still struggling with this idea that I've got to prove something to the rest of the world. If that's you, would you just do me a quick favor? Without anybody looking around, would you just raise your hand up real quick and yeah, thank you. And you can put it back, right back down. Thank you. I see those hands. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of us struggle with this. Yes. Yeah. And maybe you're here today and you're saying, man, I give way too much of myself to this idea that and I always thought that God was either blessing me or mad at me based on what I had. And now I'm understanding that God loves me for far more than possessions or anything like that. And I want to give myself fully to God. Maybe you've never given yourself fully to God. But if you're here today and you want to start right now, this moment, giving everything of your life over to Jesus and following him with everything you have. Maybe you're here and you want to start following him with everything you've got right now. Never turning back. If that's you, would you raise your hand and then put it right back down? I want to be praying for you this week. Okay. So God, we thank you and we praise you. We thank you for the blessings you put in our life, but we surrender them to you and we say, whatever you want to give us is fine with us. Help us to understand you love us whether we have stuff or not. Help us to understand that we should give all of ourselves to you, whether we live in a shack or a mansion. And help us to love others the way that you love us. But help us to have the courage to give every part of ourselves to you. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.